The bearer of doom and gloom. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll see if we can't raise some spirits, with our discussion today. I do want to add, oh, hang on, Penny posted in the chat. If the contractor is required to provide a Section 508 conformant product, so when a contract is made, will it be clear when a product doesn't need a 508 compliant product?
Anything that, so all research projects, because we are required to put all of the research reports into Rosa P. We have 5 federal repositories that we have to put our research reports into. All 5 of those federal repositories require us to have the final product be 508 compliant. So when you do your contract with whoever the contractor is, your contract should set out that your final report must be 508 compliant or we cannot accept it. And you can put in there, we don't pay, for the last quarter, whatever, however you want to do it, if they don't send you a compliant report, and that they have to understand that if they want that $200,000, 500, whatever, to do that research project, they're required to do a final report. The report is required to be 508 compliant, and that can go in your contract also. And that's the way our contracts read. We don't accept anything that isn't 508 compliant. When you send your proposal to us, it has to be 508 compliant. When you get your funding agreement, we tell you if you don't give us a 508 compliant project, number one, we don't work with you anymore, but we probably won't be paying you for a certain amount of time because that's required.
So if I could just say a couple of things. Enid, thank you so much for pointing out the FHWA website. It is excellent, and I use it myself. Also, the resource that you pointed out about the contracts, I see that it would be, I believe it would be possible to use that language, adopt that language yourself in contracting and in communications with contractors. So that's a really good resource that everyone can use. So this isn't, just to be clear, this isn't an initiative, everyone knows this isn't just a DOT thing. This is something that's being implemented across government. And, we all started this together in 2018. I do think actually, probably because NTL is a smaller library than the other federal libraries, and we have kind of a unique situation where we have a direct relationship with our submitters and the recipients of grants. So it's a lot more intimate than I think at other agencies, which works in our favor. But the big driver here is really that all content should be machine readable. And if you satisfy the criteria for 508 accessibility, you also satisfy the criteria for a completely machine readable document, because a machine readable document has to provide accessibility to the things that we talk about on a regular basis. You have to have properties metadata, because the computer reads the metadata, the properties data, as well as other metadata that's on the document. But the properties are used to render the search results. It will use those properties to send your document up to the top of the search results. When I explain that to researchers, they're all gung-ho for this, because any really good, sincere researcher wants their research to be found by search engines and to be reused. That's universal. So 508 accessibility makes that happen. So anyway, it's of a piece where we are being told that our content must be machine readable. So you can hook it to that if it helps you in your communications. I find sometimes, especially with engineers, that they get that. That helps bring them on board.
Thank you, Mary. This has been a great discussion. I think very quickly recap for the recording. Enid had brought up the topic of FHWA requirements, putting the onus on contractors rather than state agencies to make sure things are 508 compliant, and we've had a pretty good discussion on that so far. Enid, thank you for posting your contract language in the chat. I think that's going to be very helpful for folks because it looks like the future, you're going to need to change your contract language to reflect that if that's coming from FHWA, so that'll be very helpful. Now, we do have a few topics to cover during this meeting. Before I get into that, does anyone have any questions or comments on any part of what we've just discussed so far? This has been some very rich discussion. Yeah, Sarah.
Hi, yes, we have totally been dealing with this in our um, agency. And I guess one thing that we're coming across right now is a lot of contractors have Adobe, but not Adobe Pro. And so that provides a different report. Enid, how would you handle that? Or have you come across that?
What we do, we require, because the university has a problem with Adobe, and they're probably they are in fact our greatest contractor. So we have them make the report compliant at the MS Word stage.
Okay.
Then we take the document, we take it over to PDF, and if we've done our due diligence and made sure everything is correct in the MS Word stage, we shouldn't have that much that we have to correct in the PDF stage. If we've tagged all the headings correctly, made sure the fonts, put the alt text in there. Then when we run our compliance with the PDF, I find very little that has to be changed in the PDF part. So that's what we do because we're running into a lot of our contractors. Like I said, the university, they're cracking down on a lot of different programs. Adobe is one of them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for that question. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everyone is able to see that okay. So during our last meeting, we primarily reviewed Adobe PDFs and how to make things compliant through that. And there was a general consensus that folks wanted to learn more about other different document types. HTML was mentioned, for example, what's going on with that, making things more web accessible. And so I took a little bit of a dive, and thanks also to Enid for sharing some of these resources taken from the Section 508 listserv. HTML and converting PDF to HTML has been a pretty big topic and widely discussed, and there's been a lot of recent rumblings from the federal side of things as far as what they prefer to see. And in general, the consensus seems to be that PDFs don't really fit anymore for government strategies on how they want to post things online, and they're really encouraging folks to post things via HTML rather than just uploading PDF documents. Some concerns have been reviewed and posted by various blogs and folks who are in touch with government offices. And so things like smartphones, most people use your smartphones to look at PDFs and documents, and that causes a problem with scaling, for example. If a document is too small or it doesn't fit correctly, or the orientation and things like that. So related to scaling for phones and viewing PDFs in your phone, it's become pretty problematic. And according to some statistics, mobile traffic makes up over half of the visits to a government site. And if everything has to be accessible, and PDF may not be cutting the mustard with that. So moving on, we have a few sources that we checked with, to see what they're doing, and what the issues are related to that. So on the whitehouse.gov website, there's a memo from the Office of Management and Budget, which talks about inaccessible PDFs and how it is still a huge problem within the different departments and agencies. And so they wanted to come up with new federal guidelines about that to help make things more accessible, especially for HTML. And so they've come out with these new guidelines for agency websites to follow specific principles. And your organization may already follow some of these principles. I think it was just worthwhile to share some of these coming from the federal side of things. And again, all of these rules are meant for federal agencies and not necessarily state agencies. But I think as we've seen, over the years, as the federal side goes, so goes the state side soon enough. So we'll see if any of these changes gets implemented on state government side of things. But right now, it looks like the federal government's really cracking down and trying to make things a little bit more accessible with relation to PDFs versus HTML. So I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point on some of these recommendations, but you can see that they're wanting to make things a lot more user-friendly and mobile-first design that scales across various devices and sizes. And so one alternative to PDF that they're recommending is using HTML5, which is going to be a standard to publish government documents, and recognizing the need that agencies need to move past PDFs to meet Section 508 compliance. This quote comes from Mike Gifford, Senior Strategist at Civic Action. So again, I'll share this PowerPoint with everyone after this meeting, but we have links and resources that go into deep detail over HTML and these federal requirements that you can review. So very quickly, what is some of the federal guidance that's being passed around? Agencies need to have a Section 508 program manager specifically to help oversee a lot of these things, because a lot of agencies don't yet have program managers. They need to be using HTML as a default when creating publishing content online, and they should avoid developing and using alternative versions. I know on some of our websites, we may have one version for the public, and we may also say, well, reach out to us for an accessible version if you need it. They're actually recommending you probably should not do that. You should just have the accessible version up front rather than making multiple versions for different audiences. If you do have alternative versions, they should be limited to the greatest extent possible. And you should also be able to export your documents to the HTML format from Adobe. And we'll go over some steps on how you can do that and what that looks like later on after we look at these set of guidelines. All right, even more guidelines that they've posted. Again, this is on the federal side of things, so hopefully no one has a panic attack like, oh, we need to do this right now. But maybe this is something to think about as you look at your own program. So, for example, Digital Accessibility and Management of Section 508 guidance reports that within the next 30 days, agencies are required to identify a Section 508 program manager to serve as a point of contact. They also conducted a government-wide Section 508 assessment and found a majority of things were not 508 compliant. A lot of agencies were not in compliant and were in fact below expectations. More than 75% of respondents were below average. So I think looking at your own agency, if it is not where you want it to be relative to Section 508, don't worry, you're in great company because the federal government is having this exact same problem. So one of the key things I thought was interesting was there's a lot of training out there, but they called it immature training in that it may hit on some basics, but it wasn't comprehensive enough. And there just wasn't that culture, that agency-wide culture of Section 508 or the directive coming from leadership at the top that reflects a mature program. So within your own agency, you may be the point of contact for Section 508. You may deal with it, but you may be the only one. Maybe other folks within the department aren't even thinking about Section 508, and you're the only person that does. Maybe leadership doesn't know about that. So this assessment was interesting in that it pointed these things out and what makes or breaks a mature Section 508 program. And I think speaking for our own agency, I think we have a lot of work that we need to do to make sure that 508 is known among everyone, all the practitioners at the Department of Transportation. Moving quickly along, I know this is a wall of text and I'm not going to read everything out of here, but these are the specific federal recommendations that they have that came out of this previous review of the federal agencies. So very quickly, I think leadership and accountability was a big one, requiring Section 508 training, ensuring sufficient program resourcing, etc. So these bullets I'll leave for you to review and look at and maybe implement or consider for your own programs. Again, I'll send this PDF out to everyone after this meeting. So again, food for thought coming from the federal agency. Oh, before we move on to
Michael,
other
could I
topics,
make a few comments?
yes, please.
I would like to address the HTML thing for a
Yes.
few minutes. The National Transportation Library does not collect HTML as a format because it's not considered an archival format. We ran into this problem when we migrated content from the old repository to the new one. The older versions of HTML are you can't read them unless you have the appropriate software to read them. There are problems, if it's not in a it's not in a web page. So librarians do not consider HTML an archival format, but I understand, yes, it is what we create web pages from. So turning web page, we actually have this problem with the Bureau of Transportation Statistics with a publication called the National Transportation Statistics. And if you look on the front page of Rosa P., we've got a link to the series. So this is why it's a problem. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics over the course of a year has data releases that are the National Transportation Statistics, and these come out irregularly over the year, and they release the data and the publication information onto a web page. So that's not a legitimate archival format. At the end of the year, they collate that data and that information, and they make a PDF publication. They used to make a print publication out of it, and now it's a PDF. And then we archive that in Rosa P. So that's how we're dealing with that publication to website, and then what is the archival version. And then the other thing that we do, and specifically because of this example I'm using, we got involved with Internet Archive. We use the Archivit service, and on a quarterly basis, I've got it set up so it crawls the BTS website and it will pick up all of those data releases. Now, it's important that we preserve that as well as the final product at the end of the year, because as the data is released, that has an impact on the users and whoever uses that research. It could be very important what time intervals that data was released and on what dates and so forth. So there's the final publication that's a PDF, and then if you need to know over time how that data developed and was released, you can go to the Internet Archive and you can actually see the pages that had that data on it. So that's how we're archiving the HTML. So I don't want to sit here and badmouth HTML, because I also became aware in the past year that this is pretty much the only way that disabled researchers are able to create their own content. You may or may not know, but accessibility tools are not accessible to blind people. They always have to have an intermediary who makes their content that they create accessible, and vice versa. If it's not already accessible, they need to make it an accessible format for the disabled person. So that's a huge barrier for people in research, and especially in technical areas, because as we know, mathematical formulas and complex figures are often difficult, can be challenging to render 508 accessible. But HTML is a godsend to sight impaired people who create content. And HTML has been a legit solution for them to communicate with students, to communicate with other researchers, because there are no barriers. So something to keep in mind before we trash HTML. So for us, the archival format at National Transportation Library is primarily PDFA. And I don't see that changing into the future, because the best archival format is XML, and we do not have the resources to, churn all of our content through something that an engine that renders it into XML. PubMed did that, but they have millions and millions of dollars to spend on that. So I just thought I'd add my 2 cents in here. It's a complex landscape. It's more complex than I would like for it to be, but there are legitimate, HTML has a legitimate role to play in our lives, and especially if you're a disabled person. But for NTL, we do not archive HTML because we can't guarantee that people will have access to the content in future years.
Thank you for expanding on that, Mary. That is such an important distinction to make on archival copies and storing in the library versus a public-facing federal website, that may be switching to HTML over PDF. So that's a great distinction. And Enid posted in the chat, section 508.gov group is asking people to use HTML formatting for websites instead of using PDF links. And yeah, section 508.gov requirements are federal that can be implemented by states. So before we move on to different topics, I wanted to ask this group if anyone has had any experience in either working with HTML for section 508 or in converting PDF documents to section 508, and what your own state requirements are regarding that, if they've made any adjustments relative to those 2 formats. Jeffrey, yeah, I see your hand up.
Hi, yes. I'm the webmaster for the Center for Transportation Research, or TxDOT, library here in Texas. And part of my training as a librarian was to become 508 compliant with creating websites and doing that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm fairly familiar with it.
That's great. Wow. So as part of that training, could you expand on that a little bit? Like basically just ensuring all of your content is, 508 compliant through HTML? Like, is most of your content through HTML? Do you still use PDFs, or how has that changed?
Well, it's interesting. Most sites use a content management system, and content management systems are going to be run off of PHP and ASPX or some other type of back-end software that, like .NET, that will be able to generate things on the fly. WordPress is a good example of this. So is Drupal. There's some other ones like this. We don't use either of those. We use something called Lucidia Presto. And that generates our catalog so that when you type a search, it generates a page that is responsive to the search words that you used. It also means that we don't have to go through and create a HTML page every time that we generate a new asset to go into the catalog. However, what the content that you receive as a user is an HTML page or an ASPX page. These pages have HTML embedded in them, even if it's an ASPX page. And so all of the things that you learn about HTML apply to that. Same with some of the static pages. Like, for instance, we'll have a few static pages that are like about us, or, you know, here's how to generally navigate our site, and here's like our hot topics list. So those pages are still ASPX pages, but they have HTML embedded in them. And when I go through at least once a month, maybe more often, I'm sorry, maybe at least twice a month, or I'm sorry, once every other month. There is a system that we use that goes through and crawls through our site and rates every page that's generated as to whether or not it's accessible or not. And it goes through all the links and lets us know if the links not just work, but do they actually have something, a little bit of a tag associated with them that says, this is the link, and this link is going to take you to this type of page or somewhere else. So, and also images, tagging images is another important thing that's always part of a site evaluation. All the images that, for instance, even the little, not just the thumbnails that go with a particular asset, but also the generalized thumbnails, like this is a PDF, this is a doc, and that you sometimes see next to a link. All those things will also be need to be identified. The problem is we've also started using something called Bootstrap. Bootstrap is very popular in a lot of websites, and it gives us free access to a set of what could be called buttons and ways to make little you know how sometimes when you will touch on a screen and a part of this the tab, there's like fake tabs that will open, or fake things that are all within a website. Accordion is another one. The Bootstrap, make sure that you're getting the right version of Bootstrap if you're using it on your website, and double check with the Bootstrap documentation to make sure each aspect that you're using is also compliant. Most of the newest Bootstrap pieces are compliant, but not all of them. And sometimes that can cause red flags when you're designing a website, which is too bad, because it's a very easy way to add nice functionality to a website that's universal, and you can of course stylize it yourself, but it's still a universal thing with buttons and other functionality that you don't have to program from scratch.
That's interesting. I wonder, I know we do our website through Squarespace. I wonder if there's some kind of integrated functionality between that, the sites that kind of make it for you and you just kind of customize it, if we can integrate that app like Bootstrap into that. That's interesting.
Yeah, Bootstrap might be in there. It's free. And
Okay.
so they probably just integrate it into there. And yeah, basically it's just a set of rules that's all housed at one spot. And then you reference those rules, and it comes back with, and then you can overwrite any part of the rules that you want. That's kind of the nice part of it about HTML and CSS, is that you can borrow code and stuff from someone else, and then layer on top of that additional code that keeps it from breaking the previous code, especially with styles. But Bootstrap is an example of that, where you can build Bootstrap and you can add additional functionality and leave some functionality out. So for instance, if there's some functions that you don't want to use in Bootstrap, you can make your website load a lot faster by just leaving those off.
Well, thank you. That's very fascinating. I know I'm gonna look this up right after the meeting. That's pretty cool to see what we could do with that.
There's another piece that I don't know if they've come back with this or not, but it was called D3. It's still out there. D3 is used is a set of free JavaScript codes that can render graphics. like bar graphs and tables and stuff like this. The problem is D3, as far as I know, at the time that I used it, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, is not compliant in the least. They just didn't even try. Now you can put wrappers around things that say this is a bar graph, but all the functionality, which is what D3 was about, is lost. It's lost to a screen reader. So, for instance, if in a D3, there's the very simple stuff like you've got static displays that you can create with it. But you can have interactive displays too, like you pick different things and your graph will adjust. Like if you're only interested in one aspect of what a graph is showing, it could focus in on that and show you more detail in using D3. And D3 is also compatible with HTML and all these other things. But it's not, as far as I know, it's not accessible to 508. And that's true with a lot of different groups like that. You have to double check when you add a free package that they're also aware of the 508 compliance.
Yeah, that's great advice. Like something may seem new and shiny and fancy, but if it's not offering, if there's not alt text implemented or any other 508 accessible items, like is it worth it? So yeah, thank you. That's fantastic.
Sure, you're welcome. And if you have any other questions too, please let me know, and I can respond via email about different things that if you're trying to implement something to your website, I can let you know.
Great, thank you, Jeffrey. That's appreciated. Enid, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and it's just like you were saying, just because it says it's accessible, what we run into with Word documents is everyone saying, well, I can have the Word reader on MS Word read this document and it goes through and it's fine, but not all readers will read Word. So just because it looks accessible, it walks accessible, it quacks, whatever, what is that? Walks, looks, and acts like a duck, it doesn't mean it's a duck. So yeah, be very careful. Do your research when you're looking at whether it's setting up your websites, whether it's setting up browsers, whether it's setting up your Word documents. Do your research and find out what you're looking at and how it will affect others.
Great advice. Yeah, there is no replacing the human element. You may get a compliance check from Word and but it's not checking for the things that you as a human will know to check. So yeah, Enid's advice is spot on as always. Any other comments before we move on to the next topic? All right, if not, and I'm going to courtesy to Enid for sharing this information as well, but this comes from the Section 508 listserv that some of you may be subscribed to. There was a pretty hearty conversation going on about accessible fonts and specifically what fonts to use, what styles, what makes a font accessible or not. And so this comes from the listserv and especially Frances Smith, the visual information specialist at Rocky Mountain Research Station, and her advice for accessible fonts included specific font sizes, contrast, making sure there's differences between a capital O and the number 0, capital I, lowercase l, number 1. I think we've all seen some derivatives of these and how it's hard to tell sometimes what those are and what fonts that, well, really don't make those kinds of mistakes. So she's broken this down into some helpful rules and tips, and also mentions that she uses the Noto Sans or Noto Serif font families and promotes those for their publications within her group, and they meet all of the above parameters which she listed. So very quickly before we move on, does anyone want to comment on the fonts that they use? Are there any 508 fonts that you found have worked? Is there a specific font that your agency has adopted, or maybe your agency hasn't adopted any fonts yet? I think for our purposes, we generally use Arial font. We found that to be fairly 508 compliant, but there may be a better font out there that we just, we haven't looked into. So I'd be anxious to know if anyone else uses any specific fonts.
We don't have an official font at NTL or at DOT as far as I'm concerned. I've been really pushing the non-serif fonts for, especially for electronic documents. I don't think I'm disabled, but I have a lot of problem reading online fonts that have serifs. And as well as, I mean, for people who are not disabled, aren't we all having problems distinguishing between 0 and O and L and I? And I mean, it's a real issue. So I take this seriously, and I think that this is really fantastic advice from Francis Smith. I've been experimenting for the past year with the Atkinson hyperlegible font, which was developed by the Braille Institute. It's available for free, but I don't think all applications will render that font correctly. But I happen to like it a lot. I've been using it in my emails, if you've noticed. Just a personal favorite.
I just put some information, a second email came through from Frances recently, February 14th, and she discourages using Arial, and she has, 3 lines. What word is that? I don't know. RN, and if you've got poor vision like I do, is that an M? Is that an R? Is it an N? And so, ones that we were told a couple of years ago, Arial and Calibri are the ones you really should be using. Now I've got individuals saying, well, really? Should you be using these? So again, it's going to depend on your group, but these are things you should be thinking about.
Wow, thank you, Enid. This is great. You've converted me. I think we're ditching Arial now. So
I have one little tip that's not exactly related to this, but it sort of is. I just learned recently that you should always put a period at the end of your sentences, even in all text, because the screen readers stop at the period. And if you don't put a period there, it'll run on, and the person who's using the screen reader won't understand what's going on. So always put a period at the end of your text. It helps a lot.
Oh, wow. Did not know that. Wow, that's great. All right, if there's no other comments about fonts, short section, but this was very valuable. So thank you, Enid and Mary. This is great information. All right, moving along. Oh, I see a text. Jeffrey, yeah, I see your hand up.
Hi, thanks. Sorry to interrupt the last moment. One thing you can do, and what I do a lot, is steal. Steal ideals like crazy. Go to a website that you like and you find very legible, and then look at its properties. You can find that out by right-clicking on the site if you're using most web browsers, and it'll say show page source. The bottom half will open up into show you this page source, and most of y'all, including me, will not care about 90% of that source. It's all gobbledygook. However, over to the side, they have a list of fonts that are used, as well as style sheets, and you can look at the style sheet and see if the style sheet itself lists the fonts that are in it. And then you can go look for that font for yourself. A lot of the fonts that I use are uploaded through open font services like Google, and you can use Google Open Fonts to supplement your own site. Realize, though, that part of the reason that HTML was never adopted as a good way to be archival is because often the fonts that are displayed with an HTML site are entirely dependent on the person's computer. My font on a Mac will be different than your font on a Windows machine. Less so now, but it used to be much more so in the past, because Mac was like, hey, we're going to be different, and we're going to make Times New Roman our own Times New Roman. But yeah, still getting a unified font from a source like Google is a good idea, or at least looking at how your favorite website does it. That's it.
Great advice. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? And I believe Mary posted in the chat a link to the Braille Institute for a hyperlegible font. I'm probably going to download this right afterwards and see how it goes. Yeah, this looks great. This looks like something very, very needed, you know, as we figure out what font we need to do. So thank you, Mary. And Enid posted accessibility and fonts on the Section 508 Section 508 website as well. So, all right, yes, please join the Section 508.gov listserv. It really, really helps. Yep, agreed. Good information. All right, we just have a few minutes left. One of the last things I wanted to bring up that was mentioned in that listserv was a discussion on online forms and paper submissions. Specifically, if you have an online form, like for example, I think we have an Ask the Librarian form on our page. Do you need to make a paper copy available to someone who may not be able to use an online form? Here's the question specifically. If the federal government creates a public-facing website that requires to fill out an online web form, is the agency required to accept paper-based printed submissions? And I think the general consensus was you need to have multiple methods to complete this task, including there's digital, paper-based, or other means that could include calling, contacting the person, you know, email. There needs to be more than one way to turn in such a form. And so I think similarly on ours, you know, we have multiple ways. Like you can call us, you can contact us, you can submit this form. So that very quickly, I just wanted to touch on that. That specific aspect, if you have any forms on your website that you have people fill out. So with that said, I do want to give people a couple minutes back of their time before we conclude and remind everyone the next meeting. Does anyone have any comments or questions about any of the material we've covered today? I know it's been a lot. All right, if not, as always, let us know if you have any topics or suggestions for topics that you would like to see researched in depth next time. If you're having an issue with your agency or struggling with a particular problem, let us know, and as a group we can help find the answers for that. So yeah, let us know what you're working on. We're always interested. And a big thank you, round of applause, if I can find the react emoji, for Mary for her last community practice meeting. I personally, Mary, you have been an inspiration and such a guiding light in these meetings, and your professionalism and dedication has always, always, always been appreciated. So thank you, Mary, and best of luck in all of your future endeavors, and just for helping facilitate all these meetings and for all that you do. So a big thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next meeting, very quickly before we leave for the day, I'm going to look that up really quickly to see when our next meeting is scheduled for. It's going to be in April, probably late April. Let me make sure what our calendar shows. Let's see. So our next Section 508 is going to be on... Actually, I don't think we have one scheduled.
We haven't scheduled one, Michael, so I deliberately didn't do that so you and Rosalind and Beth could work this out.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Then Beth, yeah, that sounds good. Maybe you and I can connect after this meeting sometime, and we'll plan out and send to the group. So, all right, and good to see you in person, Beth, or virtually, you know, your face. So nice to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
All right, thanks again, everyone. We'll keep you posted on when we'll meet next. In the meantime, send us your topics, your concerns, and we'll see how we can tackle them. So thanks, everybody. Bye.